Oh, Dennis Young here, podcast, Primitive Substance, Series 2. Please subscribe and get on the channel. We've got great guests here and coming up. I've got Derrick Bostrum today from the fabulous, legendary Meat Puppets. Derrick,
That
nice to meet you and thanks for coming on.
Nice to meet you too, Dennis. I understand
So,
you used to be and still are in Liquid Liquid.
well, not anymore. I think the band's kind of dissolved, but our last show was 2011.
That was a
And
while ago.
so,
Still,
yeah, still, we had a couple good reunions, so it was a lot of fun. So let me hear more about you and when you started out playing the drums and when you got interested in music.
well, it's hard not to get interested in music. It's all around. I actually
Right, it's
didn't much
true.
care for music when I was a child. I used to leave the
Okay.
room when the musical artists came on, be they the Doodletown Pipers or the Gold Diggers or whatever was on TV back in the '60s.
Oh, okay. I
I'm
remember them.
I'm 64. You got to
Okay.
be similar to that. But I
Yep.
started to slowly but surely get into rock and roll what through children's television, like shows like the Banana Splits.
Oh,
Uh,
I remember that.
yep. And then as you're deciding that you want to become a member of the counterculture, you kind of have to get into music because that's the lingua franca of the counterculture.
That's
So
true.
the more pot I smoked, the more Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplanes and Frank Zappa and Yes
Oh, I
records I
loved
bought.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So by the time I first heard punk rock, I'd been fairly well versed in music, but I got into drums because a friend of mine had a guitar. None of my friends
Okay.
played music. I was interested in punk rock, and I had a friend who
Okay.
played guitar. And I said, "Well, I'll get a cheap set of drums, and I'll force him to play punk rock." Um,
That's how about that.
didn't really take for him. He wanted to pursue a career, a regular career. So it wasn't until I ran into my fellow deadbeats, the Kirkwoods, who actually
Okay.
wanted to forego a real life to become musicians. So in 1979, Curt came over to the house with a big chunk of hash, saying,
How
"Yeah,
about that? There you
I
go.
I
That's
can't
funny.
come back. I can't go back to my house because my mom's stepfather is there, and he hates me, and I hate him. So I'm just
Oh
going to hang
boy.
out here till he leaves." I said, "Well, here, let's listen to some music." And
How about that?
I had a copy of Raw Power and a copy of the Damned's album, and he had just recently seen uh, Iggy Pop come to town, and he had the first guitarist for the Damned, uh, with him. And I was like, "Here," he goes, "I could learn these songs in 5 minutes." Kurt
How about that?
he
There
had
you
been
go.
playing guitar as a he'd been trying to play in like regular bands and had gotten kicked out of them. He had been in one band that was kind of supposed to be playing wedding music and got kicked out for being too weird. And another band that was playing like kind of, I don't know what, regular kind of rock, and got kicked out for being too weird. And he had actually started playing the drums. And
Right.
so we got together, formed a little bit of a punk rock thing. He was able to learn half of Raw Power and half of the first Damned album. So he brought his little brother Chris over to play bass,
Okay.
and we formed a crazy trio, which
Hmm.
we initially called um, the Bastions of Immaturity, and
I
then
like that.
we we chose Meat
That's
Puppets because
funny.
that was one of our songs. We
Oh, okay.
kind of wrote songs based on me writing a bunch of punk rock doggerel, and then Curt would come up with a riff for it. And slowly but surely, he started writing lyrics as well. And after our first forays into hardcore, it was really more like thrash. It wasn't hardcore in the
Right.
sense that it was in no way masculine, in no way skin-headed, and mostly was um, uh, Dionysian. We just like to play
All right.
really fast and be very stoned while we did
You
it,
guys were.
and got the interest of Black Flag.
Wanted to find out how did you come up with the name Meat Puppets?
It was a song that Curt had come up with. It was just an idea.
Okay.
And when we were woodshedding for songs and stuff, he came up with a song called Meat Puppets, which didn't really have any lyrics because part of our concept was that, well, first of all, we didn't have microphone stands. So sometimes we would just take coat hangers and wrap them around our necks and wrap the microphone around that.
How about that? That's
very
cool.
cheap microphones.
Yeah.
And so Curt got into the habit of just kind of screaming and drooling. We were very into the Germs as well. So that kind of screaming and drooling into the mic wasn't uncommon to us. So Meat Puppets was just an opportunity for him to like kind of scat sing in a punk rock style. So I was like, that's a good name for us. Let's try to get some gigs.
Yeah. So did you get gigs locally first, and then did SST get the Black Flag guy, get the Henry Rollins, get the shows for you out of town?
Well, our first gig was in Tucson, Arizona, because there was a couple of bands in Tucson that had talked to Bar into letting them do their little punk rock shows. And I was what, 20, 21. I never went to bars. There were a couple of punk rock bands in Phoenix that did the occasional show that I could sneak into at a theater or something, but most of them were gone by the time 1980 turned around. Right. But around the same time, the next group of punk rockers came in and they were like renting venues or whatever. And a couple of the bands that were playing it straight, kind of like power pop, were able to talk clubs into getting bands in. And we were able to sneak onto some of these bills. And before long, we had a little punk rock scene in Phoenix, although there were hardly any gigs.
Okay.
And then eventually some of our friends that had lived in Phoenix who moved to Los Angeles were in bands. And they're like, well, you can open for us for our next gig. So we started going to California and doing shows. And that's how we eventually put out our first record on a label called World Imitation. One of the bands that we met out there in California was a band called Monitor.
Oh, I never heard of them.
And they, they did a record. They knew, since they were putting out their own records, they knew distribution up and down the coast. And one of the distributors was Joe Carducci.
Oh, how about that?
And Joe was in the process of going to work for SST, and he's like, well, when I go to SST, we'll do some records over there. And so through Joe's good graces, we got on SST, for better or for worse, because we weren't really into hardcore, and we didn't much care for the bands at Black Flag, the crowds at Black Flag were playing, because they were mostly like young macho kids who were enthusiastic about the uniform. And when we showed up there with our overalls and our long hair playing our weird covers, they used to throw stuff at us. And at a certain point, we were like, you know what? We're going to go as hard in the other direction as we can. Okay. And thusly, we began to, Curt began to write things that were a little bit more country, a little bit more Neil Young style. And we dove headlong into classic rock. And started doing covers by like Fleetwood Mac and Led Zeppelin and ZZ Top. And so Meat Puppets 2 came on board when we realized we had enough songs that were not punk rock to do a whole record of them. In fact, the whole idea of calling the album Meat Puppets 2 at the time was such an outre idea that it was supposed to be provocative to call it Meat Puppets 2 as opposed to some other crazy name. And I wanted to call it Meat Puppets 7 since it was such a incredible, advance from our first record. But Meat Puppets 2 it was.
How long did it take you to record these records? Did you do it pretty quick in the studio?
Well, Meat Puppets, the first Meat Puppets record, it took us 3 tries because we couldn't get comfortable in the studio. So we tried, doing all the things you do for separation, baffling, wearing headphones, overdubbing the vocals. We didn't like it. We tried another stab at it, didn't like it. So we said, fuck it, we're going to set up just the way we do live. So, guys had their amps right behind me, and we kind of mic'd everything. And then Curt sung live. And also just to to be sure, those guys took acid just to make sure that they were good and
Oh
cold.
man.
So some of the tuning is a little iffy on that first record, the first SST record. And also everything bled so badly into the vocals that the whole record sounded like a mess. So if you were to go in and turn off the vocal track on those multi-track tapes, you'd hear it would basically sound like Wasted Youth or something. But with all the bleed into the vocal mics and all that screaming, it just sounds strange. But so that, we did that in an afternoon after a couple of aborted tries. Meat Puppets 2, I think we recorded that over the course of a couple of days. And I think we recorded the basics in a day, an evening. And then we tried recording the vocals, and Curt couldn't get comfortable. Again, we were trying to sing like normal stuff. But I come to understand from later from people who know more about music than I do that album is out of key, whatever the hell that means. Okay. So he wasn't able to sing at that particular key that he had recorded his basics at. So so you listen to a track like Plateau, where half of the song is him singing very low like this, and then for the next half he goes, he's singing up like this, because he couldn't split the difference.
How about that?
We actually had to come back in to do a second recording session just to do the vocals, just to focus on that while he tried to work out his strategies. And then the damn record sat in the can for 6 months while, here we had this record that was going to be the first, post-punk rock, post-hardcore thing where punk rock bands are trying to play, country or folk or rock or whatever. And SST sat on our tapes for like 6 months and wouldn't let us mix it. And meanwhile, Husker Du and the Minutemen came out, and Replacements came out, and all these other bands were able to get their foot in the door as a punk rock flavored, sensibility that was, focusing a little bit more on non-punk rock music. Finally, we get Spot and the tapes into one studio in Phoenix, and we start mixing. And right about that time, Curt's girlfriend's water breaks, and she has twins right in the middle of our mixing session.
Gosh.
So, we mixed the record as quickly as we could, and then it sat in the can for another 6 months.
Oh my gosh!
And here we are. Meanwhile, Black Flag have got My War out, so now they're post-punk too. We go out on the road with them to promote My War and Puppets 2. And the next thing you know, we're getting spit at. They're getting spit at. The crowds are going nuts because we're not playing harder, faster, louder, and it was a fantastic tour.
But why did they hold on to the record? Why didn't they want to put it out?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I would assume. Well, you have to understand. First of all, they had made a deal with a label called Unicorn, and they had signed papers that allowed Unicorn the right or the feeling that they could sue them for if they use their own name. So they put out My War. Unicorn had a deal with MCA. Right. And so basically they were like, we're going to get this record out distributed by MCA. It'd be a great thing. Well, MCA's president listened to it and declared it an anti-parent record and refused to release it, which, left everybody holding the bag.
Yeah, of course.
So Unicorn still had the rights to Black Flag and couldn't release the record. And finally they put it out, and they put a sticker on it saying, MCA says it's anti-parent, get into it. And obviously it's considered a classic.
It is.
But then Unicorn went under, and they wouldn't release Black Flag. So Black Flag was unable to release any records from like 1982 to like 1984.
Oh boy.
And they even put out a record called Everything Went Black, which was a collection of demos and stuff like that. and they put it out under their personal names like Greg, Chuck, whatever. And Unicorn was like, yeah, nice try, lawsuit. And so they like
boy.
that sucked a lot of the energy out of their thing and their cash flow. So, by the time, and then, you got these bands like Husker Du, Minutemen, Meat Puppets, who are wanting to put out records that would need to be heard and that are have a
exactly
chance
that
in the
period.
marketplace.
Absolutely.
And they don't have the cash flow to like really throw down. So it took a while. It was a struggle, and it kind of wrecked Black Flag, and it kind of wrecked SST in a lot of ways because they never were able to put their best foot forward on that shit. And
well, it wrecked us too when White Lines came out.
Yeah,
that was it for 99 Records. That was it.
There's nothing worse that for an independent label than a success. So what ends up happening with a major label or with a minor label, and with especially with a shoestring distribution setup like they have, is you've got to withhold the records that are your cash cows and try to get your records that are not as much of a cash cow. You cross-pollinate the promotion. So suddenly there's ads that have Meat Puppets and other bands you've never heard of. And we'd be like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And then, fast forward a couple of years and major labels start paying attention and signing up bands like Meat Puppets, Husker Du, Replacements, whatever. And the minor, the independent distribution can't function without the cash cows. And slowly but surely, as the distributors go out of business, they go out of business owing the labels lots of money. And the next thing you know, nobody, the air is getting sucked out of the situation.
No. Did you guys tour? Did you tour around the country too? I mean, did you go?
We toured all over. We toured.
I know. I figured that.
We toured. First we toured up and down the coast with Flag in like 1981.
Okay.
Then we went on our own headlining tour in 1982, and that was seriously painful. It was like 500 miles for somebody's living room floor and $25.
Oh man.
And definitely didn't make any money.
Right.
But it's when you're 21
years
old, what's the difference?
You're
I
right.
mean, you learn what not to eat if you don't want to get sick, if nothing else. But we made it as far back as we played in CBGB's in 1982.
That was a great place. Yeah, we did too.
And I would hope you would.
Yeah, I know. Well, we played the big club. Did you play Araz?
Not Araz. No. Well, we weren't dancing like you guys. You guys could pull it off. You guys could pretend to be an actual concern, whereas we were extremely.
I know you guys were. Yeah, you were intense. Intense band.
Yeah, we liked it that way. But SST had their own booking company, and by 1983, we didn't really we did the tour in 1984 with those guys, and we didn't really like touring with them because it would be like, if you've read any of Henry's books about those times back then, it's a little mercenary. And so, even in one of Henry's tour diaries, he's dissing the Meat Puppets for refusing to help load Black Flag's equipment in and out of the club. And we're like, you guys are giving us $25 a night, loan your own fucking equipment.
Oh, man.
So we were lucky. We got an opportunity to work with Frank Riley, who was just getting started. He's out in your neck of the woods.
Okay.
Now he is part of High Road Touring, which is a pretty substantial booking agent. And Frank has been an important mover and shaker since the early 80s.
Okay.
And for some reason, he wanted to work with us. And he got us a show in, I can't remember the name of the club. We played the various places in New York. And Curt was afraid to fly. He had gotten into a plane accident as a teenager. And Frank booked us. His first gig with us was a really nice gig. It was with like Suicidal Tendencies or some hardcore band.
Okay.
And it was in 1984, maybe 83. I can't remember. Gotta be 84. But Curt tried to back out of it because he was afraid to fly. And Frank, God bless him, said, "Well, Curt, it's up to you, of course, but if you do this to me, I'll make sure to fuck you.
Oh boy.
Which is good. It's, you know,
Yeah.
it's an adult conversation.
There you
And
go.
we had a more than one adult conversation with Frank Riley, who is God, you know, my favorite guy in the business.
How about that?
Somebody who always treated us pretty fair and pretty straight. And you know, I could say I try not to diss anybody specifically, but I like to diss everybody in general because I hate the music business.
Oh no, it's pretty rough
Frank
business.
is awesome.
Sure.
But so we got our own, we were able to, and that was a good thing for us to get our own separate booking agent, separate from Black Flag. And so we were able to get not just play Black Flag's hardcore circuit. We got to do more interesting shows and get more different opportunities. And by the time we were good and sick of touring, because that's how we made a living, we did well enough to never have to take jobs.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, that's great.
I had a job parking cars in December of 1980, and I didn't have to get another job until 2002.
Oh wow.
So you know, so we kept at it, but that just meant being on the road all the time, and also having to put out records all the time. And then, you know, things start to slowly but surely kind of unravel in the indie scene as the majors start to get interested, because bands like Chili Peppers and Jane's Addiction start to get popular. Huskers get signed, replacements get signed. Minutemen would have gotten signed if they hadn't have ended. And so we were like, shit, we have to get signed. And it was no small task to try to find somebody who was foolish enough to sign the Meat Puppets.
Yeah,
we had one fella, we went up to his office in 1986, and his name was Gary Gersh, I believe. And, you know, we were in his office. He had his shoes off. He had his like stocking feet up on the desk. And he's like going, I love you guys, but I don't know how to sell you. And, you know, you guys, you just don't have a look. You don't have you know, you don't have a shtick, a gimmick that I could sell. And we're like, we used to fight. The three of us, we used to feel very discouraged. Well, I don't know if Curt did. Curt kept to himself. But Cris used to get very discouraged because he felt that we should be working with Brian Eno.
There you go.
And instead of YouTube, and he was very jealous. And I'd be like, fuck all these people. That stocking footed motherfucker doesn't know how to sell us. Fuck him.
That's
and the RC wrote, and Cris would be like, you're not working hard enough. You're going to be the death of us. I'm like, this is my personal art project. I don't give two shits about the business. But despite that, Curt did care about the business. He did try to put his best foot forward. And we did try to make records that could compete, despite the fact that we were recording on a shoestring and didn't have a clue. But eventually we did talk London Records into putting out records by us. And we did 3 records with them, including Too High to Die, which here's the thing about, if you're going to make the mistake of signing the Meat Puppets to your major label, then you can kind of live and die by your signings. If all of your signings fail, then you fail. So at a certain point, you got to call in favors. And you come, you know, the head of the record label comes knocking on the radio door going, Guy, listen, could you help me out here and play these guys? Now, in the meantime, something called Nirvana happened. You probably remember. You remember a little dance they used to call the Nirvana. And so it just so happened he liked us. And that was just pure luck.
Wow.
We just got on tour with them right before they were going to go on.
That's something.
Right before they did their Unplugged thing. And he invited Curt on because he wanted to do some Meat Puppet songs and was too exhausted to learn. And was just burned out, I guess, you know. But basically he was like, rather than teach me the songs, why don't you come along on TV with me? And MTV was not happy when they found out that this was their special guest, somebody they'd never heard of, who had no commercial potential. And yet it was fantastic for us, and it gave our record label enough clout to like shoehorn us into it. Basically, you know, if you, I don't know what you've done since since your heyday in the early 80s.
Right.
But I know a little something about business, and you just have to justify your budget. And if Kurt Cobain likes you, you can go back to the budget man and say, hey, we're going to need a promotional budget for these guys. I think it's worthwhile. And they'll go, all right. So what do? You hire independent promo men, and then next thing you know, your record is out and it's on the radio and you do well. And then a year comes around, they're like going, we'd rather support boy bands this season. You guys are passe. And so we ended up, getting ditched.
Boy.
And then in the meantime, our poor bassist, Cris, who always coveted success the most, now we know why he coveted other people's success, because he did so poorly with his own, which is to say, like so many people. But typical of the Meat Puppets, he survived like a big dog, and he and I continue to play music on the weekends to this day, even though Kurt's in Austin. We're currently on hiatus. We don't have anything going on. But Cris and I, we play like bad prog rock as a bass and drum duo. Not in any way dancey, Dennis. Not like your thing.
No, well, we didn't want to be a dance band. We were like an alternative group. We played a lot of like the standard clubs, but I guess, our songs kind of like went in that area, especially the third record.
That's what you're called now. If you go on Wikipedia, you're called dancey.
I know.
But
and then you quit the band in '96, right? And then you came back in 2000, what? 18?
Yeah, not 17, 18. Thing about your band is, if it hadn't been for the Kirkwoods, I probably would have wound up in a group like that, because that was the kind of music I was making. Like I still have my copy of the first pop group single, so I'm right there. By the time you guys came around, I was broke, but so I don't have any of your all's records, but I still have a handful of my old 45s, which I didn't sell.
Well, we didn't make much money, and only from the shows. We never got much money from the label 99 Records. That, maybe a few royalty checks. We didn't start making the money until Cavern and the White Lines, like 30, 40 years later. It took this long.
One of the lucky things about us, which is unique among SST bands, is that we went to the mat with them. We eventually had to get professional management, because when we signed with London Records, they insisted. And our professional manager was like, worked hard to help us get our back catalog, back.
See, that's great. See, you got that out. That's good.
And that's, especially for SST bands, it's pretty unlikely, but we threw down. Now, that said, we probably had to borrow money from our record company, and I'll bet you we still haven't recouped on Too High to Die.
Oh boy! So
we certainly didn't to begin with, but given the fact that we had a hit record and we had a manager, we were able to work with SST through the legal system, as they say, to get our records back, and we're releasing them now on our current label, Megaforce, and that's really what we've been doing this year.
Oh, it's great.
Re-releasing our old records. And we've had them out in the past, and we released them on Ryko disc in 1999.
Okay.
But these are some of the first like vinyl copies of some of this stuff that have been out in a while. And we've got the last three of this reissue series coming out next month. And
how's the response been? Are they people excited to buy them, or how are you doing with the records as far as sales?
Well, let me put it to you this way. People love Meat Puppets too, and they love Up on the Sun. A couple of people like the other ones. We have those two popular records. They're evergreens. People, you'll go on YouTube and see people talking up Meat Puppets 2, which is weird for me because the damn record is 40 years old. And
that's something.
And it's like I was talking to a friend of mine who does a guitar podcast today, and he was like, "What do you think of Billy Gibbons?" And I'm like, "I hate what he did to it when he remixed his records." Now, I don't know if you're ever a ZZ Top fan, but after they had their success with Afterburner, Billy Gibbons went back in and did a box set on CD of all of their old records, and he added a ton of digital like reverb and stuff and triggering to make it sound more like Afterburner for the people who bought that. Obviously, trying to keep his music relevant to the people who bought Afterburner, which is really their biggest hits ever. We were appalled. I was
about that.
Like, it was the worst sounding shit I'd ever heard.
Yeah.
Do you remember when Frank Zappa first started putting stuff out on CD?
Right.
A couple of his coolest record, We're Only in It for the Money. He re-recorded the bass, the drums by like Chad Wackerman and like really 80s kind of digital drums on this 1967 tape. Sounded horrible.
Oh boy. I haven't heard that. Thank goodness.
And, over time, slowly but surely, got to figure in the early 80s, CD mastering as it is, it probably would have sounded pretty cruddy. But nowadays, what with, computer technology being what it is, you can get away with that. But my friend, who's quite a bit younger than me, he just thinks it's cool that Billy Gibbons did that because he's grown up with digital audio. He's grown up with mashup and remix culture, and it doesn't see anything wrong with that. Whereas I'm like, well, what can you say about a guy who it's like, you have a sound and you just toss that sound in the garbage can to try to chase a current popular trend, which is like gated reverb on drums.
Right.
It's terrible.
It is. Now, you guys put out the first live record, right? During that, when you reissued the records live in Montana?
Correct. Yeah. And we released.
How'd you come up with that title? Were you guys playing in Montana?
Well, here's the thing. In 1987, we started working with David Klassen, who was the Minutemen's sound man and Black Flag sound man for a while. And he came to work with us. And, it's so nice having the same guy night after night working in the back of the house.
I know. Sure.
And you're an experimental band, you guys. So, like if you want to add effects live, you need to have a certain level of control over it. And we gave Davo the freedom to, add effects while we were playing. And so
that makes a big deal.
Yeah. And we started jamming more and doing more space things. He was a big Grateful Dead head. We were really into the Dead. So we started doing this kind of space kind of a thing. Meanwhile, Davo was Davo Klassen, who's called Davo. Right. He was, buying rack gear and, recording all of our stuff. And I have crates full of cassettes and DATs of our shows from like 1987 till like 1995.
Okay.
And when Ryko came on board, he's like, we want to do a live record.
Right.
And I'm like, well, Davo, this is your big chance. Do Davo's picks.
Right.
And he was like, cool. And I didn't hear from him. And then less than 2 weeks before the deadline, he's like, oh, I couldn't come up with anything. I'm like, you piece of shit. Give me all those tapes. So he gave me all the tape. And I went out and bought a copy of Pro Tools and an audio card, which I slapped in my 1999 Mac Pro.
Right.
And found a couple of shows. I found 2 shows. We did 2 shows in Montana in 1988.
How about that?
They sounded similar, and they were back to back, so the performances are about the same, but they didn't have the same set list. So between those 2 shows, I was able to come up with enough material to do a whole record. So I actually digitized and mastered the whole thing back in my house, and then gave it to Ryko to do. So that's how that record came out.
But people love hearing the live stuff. I mean, our first record, 3 of the songs were recorded at Hurrah's. Our first big dance show, dance club. But Ed Bauman did all our sound back in the early days. So that was great. We had a sound man also. What a difference that makes.
Oh, yeah. I still miss it. Like, since I've gotten back, going on tour, it's torture. You get into town, you hook up with the local losers.
Oh, that's what it is. You're right.
The thing is, I'm 64 years old. They're like 20 something. They think they're all hot because they're into music that I hate.
Yeah.
And they don't know how to mix the Meat Puppets. They're just like going, could you turn the guitars down? And I would literally go back to the guys. Look, this room is empty.
Yeah.
These guys are not going to turn their sound down for you now. You're going to have to wing it. Once this room is full, it's going to be fine. But inevitably, I get on stage. We do, and you got to like get up early, drive all day to get there for load in at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, then struggle through this useless sound check.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You can't hear yourself on stage, and you sound like shit in the crowd. And so basically, without your own sound guy, your own, if you don't have your own people with you, it's really hard.
It is. So what are you guys going to do in the current, what are your plans? More touring? Are you going to cut another record, or what's the plans for the Meat Puppets going forward?
Well, similar to Ryko, when our current record company, Megaforce, when we licensed our reissued our SST records to them, they're like, well, we want a live album too. So at this point, the idea is like, oh, it's not such a bad thing if you do it at home, because then the budget is next to nothing, and you might actually make something if you sell 100 copies. So I digitized a bunch of country covers from like the 90s, during the time when we were like promoting our major label records, and did a record called Camp Songs with them, which we released last fall. That's still current. It did well. It's cheap, so I'm like thinking about all of that, those milk crates full of board tapes I've got, and collecting some of them, digitizing them, and maybe putting some of those out as limited editions. We're not planning on touring right now. I mean, it's just like, let's see, Santana canceled today.
How about that?
Helmet canceled last week. Bands are just finding it increasingly difficult. I mean, I think Santana he needs surgery, but it's very difficult to go on tour when you're old and there's no money. So, and we did some tours on Dusty Notes, which is our last studio album, and it's hard to make money.
Yeah, imagine it is. Music business is tough. It's not easy. That's like saying that working on the Chain Gang is tough. Yeah, it's tough. All right, that's one word for it. It's just they're streaming. You don't make any money off it. No. Kids don't care. No, you're right. But we're doing it for the love of music at this point. And you guys got a legacy that's really important in that period of time.
That's why I got back into it. That's what I. In fact, there's this documentary. It came out either last year or the year before about King Crimson.
Right.
And I've been looking through. I haven't watched the whole thing yet. But there's a drummer. He used to be with Ministry. He played with REM. Can't remember his name off the top of my head. He died of colon cancer in like 2018, 2019. And they've got him on film. And he's
I know who that is. I've got his name. Yeah, I know who he is.
Bill somebody, really.
Bill,
interesting guy. And of course, for a while, King Crimson had 3 drummers. How awesome is that? So they're interviewing him. They're like going, and the guy's like going, if you want to talk about it, great. If not, you can tell me to fuck off. And he goes, you want to talk about my colostomy bag? So he's basically like, I've had my prostate removed and my this, that, and removed.
Like you want to hear that, Well, it is what it is.
Well, the thing is, he says that his doctor had to talk with him. He's going, look, this is now the time that you want to do only what you feel like doing and nothing else. And he's like, I'm going to play with King Crimson. And he said something that like was absolutely true, which is that music allows you it restores you to a state of grace, if only for like a fleeting moment.
Yeah.
And it's so fucking true.
It is.
And it's like the music, it's like you go on the road and you're traveling for 24 hours a day. You get to play for an hour and a half and it makes it worth it. No sleep, bad food, arguments, losers coming around bugging you, getting ripped off by the music business and given the short shrift by promoters and whatnot. And but the magic, the last time we did our last tour was 2 years ago. And the magic, I don't even have to use the word magic anymore because of this wonderful King Crimson drummer. I can use the word grace. It's a state of grace that I'm in when I play music. And it's That's the only thing that's worth doing it.
Well, I feel
second to podcasts. I mean, obviously, I do it for the podcasts,
yeah.
but
well, this has been important to me, these podcasts, because I'm talking to everybody like yourself who are around that during that time that aren't getting a lot of exposure and that need to have a voice out there. And I think maybe down the line, people that are going to be lurking for the Meat Puppets will be looking for this or other interviews you do. I think. So
well, let me tell you something.
Great.
Let me tell you something, Dennis. Before the Meat Puppets, there were 3 big fans of Gong. So God bless you for talking to Tim Blake.
Oh yeah, that's right. I was a huge fan of Gong. I had 3 hours with Tim Blake.
Yeah. Too bad he's French. Too bad you can hardly understand him.
No, he's very English.
Oh well, he's got a heavy accent.
He does. And Charles Hayward, I spoke with. That's another legend.
We got a lot off of Gong. Gong was the most
great
out there band. I was like,
they were.
He had a song. David Allen had a song called "Floating Anarchy," which really influenced us.
How about that?
It made us. Curt put it this way. He's like, "Floating Anarchy is like the foam on top of a glass of beer. It's like the shit that floats to the top and then dissipates." And that's the state of grace that you get from music. Well, Floating Anarchy.
Coming up, I just spoke to Bill McCormick, and he was around for the first Soft Machine show.
Sure.
With Robert Wyatt, Kevin Ayers, and David Allen. Now, can you imagine being in the room with that?
Good for you, man.
Yeah. So, I want to get this out. I've been very lucky to get people to do it. It's a percentage game. A lot of people don't want to talk on camera about their career or their music, so. It is what it is.
I've recorded long podcasts that the host later has decided not to issue.
Oh boy, this will be out for sure. We'll put it up. So Derrick, this has been a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Dennis. I love to chat. Once I get started, it's hard for me to stop.
That's okay. We'll do it again once more of your records come out. We'll get back on here and talk more.
I usually stop when my voice gives out, which is right about now.
Okay. All right. Listen, have a good day out in Arizona, and you're a legend by my means, that's for sure, and a lot of your fans out there. So
thank you, Dennis. Good luck, Al. I'll be looking for this feed.
Okay. Take care. I'll have it out. Take care. See ya.